Call Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak in the first reading of the Taxation, International Investment and Remedial Matters Bill. And I think it's important just to pause briefly, Mr Speaker, to note that that is in fact the name of the bill. The Taxation, International Investment and Remedial Matters Bill. What the bill is not called, Mr Speaker, is the Taxation, International Taxation, Life Insurance and Remedial Matters Bill, because that's the speech that Jonathan Coleman gave to open the first reading, the same speech, Mr Speaker, that the Honourable Peter Dunn gave when he introduced the Taxation, International Taxation, Life Insurance and Remedial Matters Bill. So Mr Coleman, Dr Coleman, gave the wrong speech. But do you know what makes it more interesting, Mr Speaker, is that the speech Peter Dunn gave, that Jonathan Coleman read out again tonight, Peter Dunn gave it on the 23rd of July 2008, when Mr Dunn was in fact a minister in a Labour government. An oldie but a goodie indeed, Carol Beaumont. So just to clarify for Dr Coleman, I've got it right here, Dr Coleman, Peter Dunn's speech from the 23rd of July 2008, about word for word. So yes, I think you probably delivered it with slightly less enthusiasm than Mr Dunn. But yes, certainly when you worked out it wasn't actually about the bill we were debating tonight. So there we go, Mr. And I certainly will table that at the end of my speech, just to make sure we can all see that Dr Coleman read out the same speech that Peter Dunn did, except it was about another bill. Is Mr Dunn, I think, is the one who's been inconsistent, though, Mr Hayes. He was a Labour minister when he gave the speech the first time. Anyway, Dr Coleman, I'm sure we're all grateful for hearing that great speech from Mr Dunn from July 2008 once again in the House tonight, even if it's not actually about the bill that's in front of us tonight. So, Mr Speaker, as other Labour colleagues have said, we certainly are supporting this bill to the Select Committee. It's a dense taxation bill. It's not a bill that personally I would normally have much time to focus on, but I've been pleased to be able to have a look at it tonight, and I can see that there are elements of this that look like they will be worthwhile. They're making reforms in the way that New Zealanders are taxed for income from interests in overseas entities and the gains of foreign residents from interest in New Zealand companies. This is a difficult area of taxation. It is a complicated area of taxation and therefore deserves Select Committee scrutiny. What it aims to do is provide consistency of tax treatment between similar types of investment, and it achieves this by extending the active income exemption and active business test with some small modifications to non-portfolio foreign investor funds. And so on this side of the House we can certainly understand that it's doing something that will be welcomed by a number of investors, and certainly something that deserves the attention of a Select Committee. But some of the questions that we will be asking on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, are around just who will benefit from these changes. Because on this side of the House we've become suspicious over time about the way in which the National Party constructs its taxation program and its taxation legislation. And we certainly saw that when the tax switch, or the tax swindle as some people have called it, was brought into this House, where the tax system is essentially now tilted in favour of the top earners in this country. And Mr Speaker, we heard from the previous Government Speaker, Sam Lotoainga, about the great program that the National Party had in office and their fantastic track record when it came to taxation. Well, Mr Speaker, all we see on this side of the House in terms of a track record on taxation is taxation policy that favours the wealthy in our society. And while the National Party might be prepared to go back 2 decades to trickle-down economics and hope for the best, that will lead to an economic recovery for New Zealand, we don't believe that's so on this side of the House, Mr Speaker. We believe that when we look at the overall economic program and taxation policy as part of that we've got to adjust ourselves to a modern world. We're not going to go back to failed economic policies like trickle-down economics. We actually need a taxation system and an economic policy that's going to deliver for the exporters of New Zealand, that is going to deliver high-quality jobs for New Zealanders in high-tech, clean, green industries. And Mr Lotoainga stood up and talked about the changes that National had made. One thing he didn't talk very much about was the change to the R&D tax credit. The removal of the R&D tax credit. Now, tax credit systems there are varying views about them, Mr Speaker, around the world, but one thing is absolutely clear when it comes to research and development tax credits. Australia's got one. And many of the people that I spoke to when Labor brought in our tax credit said the best thing about this is that we're matching the Australians. That means that the incentive to perhaps take our business, take our research and development part of our business offshore, that's gone. But National, upon coming into office, got rid of that R&D tax credit. And for businesses in this country, that was a negative moment. That was a taking away of an incentive to improve what most people acknowledge, Mr Speaker, has not been a great record on investment in research and development in this country. So Mr Lotoainga might be in speaking on this bill proud of National's tax record, but the truth is, Mr Speaker, that National walked away from an opportunity to enhance investment in our businesses, to increase the research and development that is so vital for New Zealand. But when we look at this bill, we're also concerned about the way in which National's gone about some other major elements of their tax policy. GST being the obvious one. And at the 1st of October, GST went up by 2.5%. And it's worth reminding the House, Mr Speaker, that John Key went into the 2008 election saying that GST would not increase. GST would not increase. The video's out there for anyone who wants to watch it. Now, Mr Key has stood up in this House and he said, well, it all depends on what context he was talking in. Well, the context he was talking in was whether or not GST would go up under a national government, and he said it wouldn't. You cannot get around it, and that kind of broken promise on taxation policy is the very reason why people on this side of the House look very closely at all taxation bills that come before this House to see whether or not, to see who's actually benefiting from them. Because what we know, Mr Speaker, is that the people who are being the most affected by the increase in GST are those on the lowest incomes. And they're the people who got the least out of the tax cut package, and they're the most affected by the increase in GST. It's a double whammy, and we know, Mr Speaker, from talking to families all around New Zealand, that the impact of this government's tax policy has been negative for those on the lowest incomes. Families who thought they would be better off because the national government had promised them tax cuts are actually finding themselves worse off. In some cases up to $50 a week worse off when we build in the impact of ACC levy rises, the cuts to funding for early childhood education. These are families who are already struggling with cost of living increases. Here in Wellington, I've had people coming to see me about something as simple as bus fares going up. When bus fares go up, that puts a huge pressure on people who rely on that as their mode of transport. In Wellington, bus fares effectively went up for some people by $40 a month if they caught the bus every day. $40 a month. That's actually a big chunk out of people's disposable income. If their power prices have gone up, and here in Wellington, those of us who are customers of 2 or 3 of the power companies here, those letters have come in 6% increase in power prices. That's added on to families who are struggling and not benefiting from the tax policy of this government. And Mr Speaker, I don't claim to be any kind of expert on taxation, but as my colleague Raymond Hall said before, it's about priorities. It's about the priorities this government gives in terms of where it wants to take New Zealand into the future. Is the priority investing in people, in skills, in training, in supporting people into work, and making sure that all New Zealanders can achieve their potential? Or is the priority in making decisions about trickle-down economics, hoping for the best, rewarding the privileged few, rather than developing the potential of the many? So it's sad for me, Mr Speaker, that we have a taxation bill here. Jonathan Coleman's nearly caught up now with which bill we're actually debating. But this taxation bill is fine. It should go to the Select Committee. It should be discussed. But when it comes to tax policy, this government has sadly broken its promises as part of an economic plan that they have not provided to New Zealanders. What we see is a government without vision, and in the case of tax policy, favouring the privileged few over struggling New Zealanders who need their support.
I call Amy Adams.